forth in the chat room. Can someone in this group define a rivalry? How many rivals does one team have? It seems to me somebody thinks every team in the Big 12 is a rivalry. No, I don't think so, although some don't look at anyone as a rivalry. And the term is way overused, which it might be. It depends on who you are. It depends on how old your institution is. It depends on what conferences you've been in or are now, what state you're in, what region you're in. For example, who's Clemson's rival?
Florida State and South Carolina. Those are their two big ones.
Okay.
I mean, but they're Florida State's biggest conference rival, even though Miami's in the conference, because since Miami's joined the conference, it's been more about Clemson and Florida State. But as far as Florida State's biggest rivals, it's Florida and Miami.
Right.
So I think I told TJ that you get 2. I'm going to amend that to say
3.
I'm going to say, I said, I'm going to amend that and say you get 3 max, where the third one, though, is not near as crucial as the other 2, and for varying reasons. But,
all right. Who are Texas's rivals? They have one.
It's Oklahoma. They're about to have their second one again in A&M, but that one went away for a while.
And, of course, they'll be, we don't look at them as, yes, you do.
But,
yeah, you do.
And then you have,
they are.
Then the other problem is you have.
Despite the explosive difference in the win-loss record.
A&M is a great example of this in that there were a lot of schools in the old SWC and Big 12 that thought A&M was that was their big rival. Like Baylor and Tech really thought A&M was that was the one that their fans. Well, A&M didn't reciprocate the feeling.
Well,
so to be a rival, I think it's got to be reciprocated.
A&M doesn't want to reciprocate, but then they get their britches all torn up if Texas looks at them as not a rival.
Yeah, well, I mean, Texas looks at them as the second biggest rival. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, they're in each other's domes.
But for Texas Tech and Baylor, it was. Whether A&M thought it was or not doesn't matter. If you think they're a rival, then that gets you stoked up. That's great.
It's funny that. What's the definition of a rivalry? The definition of the rivalry is the exact opposite of what you're trying to prove. The definition of rivalry is competition for the same objective or for superiority on the same field. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. So by that definition, all the Big 12 are rivals. All the SEC would be rivals. I mean, by the exact definition of it, but I know that's not the definition that we're going for. But yeah, what's the question? I don't know how.
Can someone in this group define a rivalry?
I just did exactly the way
How many can you have?
I mean, I don't think there's not rules for this. Like, I don't feel like we have to apply hard rules to everything to where it's no, you can't have more than 2. I think it just depends. I mean, some schools consider others rivals, as y'all have pointed out, that those aren't exactly reciprocated, but it doesn't change the fact that Baylor still considers A&M a rival. Doesn't change the fact that Baylor still considers Texas a rival. I know it's not reciprocated, but it doesn't change that fact. So it's in the eye of the beholder, like a lot of things.
Oklahoma has Texas, and they've had Oklahoma State, and for a long, long time, it was a team from Lincoln, right? Those are 3 legitimate rivals. Now, they dominated Oklahoma State. Texas has a better record against Oklahoma, I think, in the long run. Oklahoma had a better record against Nebraska, but when you look at those 3, one of them was regional, one of them was recruiting and also elite games with Texas OU, and one of them was probably who's going to win the Big 8 and play for the national championship for the longest of time. So there's reasons behind it. So, TJ, hopefully we gave you a pretty good answer on that.
TJ's a Texas fan, right? Is that TJ
now,
the Texas fan?
Paxton's the Texas fan.
No, I think TJ's a Texas fan.
That's a different TJ.
Okay, it's a different TJ. That's what I was trying to figure out. Okay. Well, if I was thinking if it was the Texas fan TJ, then I understand where the question's coming from because they look at it differently than if you were to ask a Baylor fan or a Texas Tech fan or a TCU fan or whoever. They're not going to look at, but yeah, like Oklahoma, and then here pretty soon A&M. And you'll get the old-timers, right, that throw Arkansas in there. And you get the new schoolers in there that are probably going to be predicting, like, LSU will be one, that kind of thing. But, yeah, I mean, that's from their point of view. If you go ask somebody from a different point of view who's sitting on a different level or, one's sitting on top of a mountain, the other's on, the bottom of a ravine, they're going to have different, vantage points the way that they're looking. And so, yeah, it's all depends on what school you're talking about. But there's not – like if somebody wants to claim like Texas Tech that Texas is a rival and Texas doesn't want to reciprocate that, well, that's not going to change either one's opinions. Texas Tech's still going to consider Texas a rival whether they want to acknowledge it or not.
TJ, I'm a Baylor fan. He also
there's a TJ Texas fan. That's why I was
Texas
asking.
Tech and TCU and Houston fan now because he can pick whoever he wants.
Yeah. I think that Houston will have some automatic rivals built in with the Texas schools. I think one or two will probably separate more than the others. You know, you might have more of a rivalry with Texas Tech, but I think all those Texas schools are going to be rivals, and I think you could probably lump Oklahoma State either into that part of it or into more of the KU, Kansas State schools perhaps now.
I just think that you can't keep calling everybody that. It'd be like, you know, like calling everybody your best friend. Like at a certain point, like, you know, yes, you're a conference rival and you want to win that game and you don't care for each other, but if you if you ask, I think the acid test is, okay, if you lost to Kansas State for 5 years in a row, but you beat Texas 5 years in a row, would you trade that off? If your answer is yes, then Texas is your rival, right? And, you know, because that's what makes the rivalry.
And also, Texas is a rival for a lot of schools because they have dominated the hell out of them over the years, not as much recently. And so that can create that because you want to beat the team. From Coleman 901, Texas's rivals, Oklahoma, a lot of space then between 1 and 2. Then it's A&M, a lot more space. And then Arkansas, no more after that. And they have played Arkansas a little bit along the way. All right, thank you very much for a lot of your feedback on that.
Coleman also asked me what's the most underrated rivalry in the Big 12. That is a good question.
All right, listen. Texas Tech's biggest rival is Texas, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Baylor's biggest rival has become, because of recency and the fact that is TCU, although, yes, they want to beat Texas, OU, but it's TCU.
Yeah, but that's not, like, super recent either at this point. I mean, like, the heat of that was 10 years ago, so that's not, like,
but I think it's carried over. I think they think that's a team they would rather – everyone would probably rather beat Texas, even though most people have been beating them of late. But you're right. That's the last, 10 or 12 years?
Well, I mean – in terms of the Big 12, really, in terms of like heated competition, but TCU Baylor goes back way longer. I think it's one of the more underrated. I don't think many people know how heated that really is because it's two smaller schools that are overshadowed by like 3 or 4 others at any given time within the same state borders.
Right.
And so it's not one you immediately think of, but I think that one's as hated as probably anyone that's out there, and certainly as heated at times, even though – you know, it takes 2 to tango, and Baylor can't win a football game to save their life against TCU. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter if it's hot, cold, home, away, you're good and they suck, they're great and you suck. It doesn't matter. Whatever the situation, Baylor's going to lose to TCU. So it's kind of turned into that, and that's, I think, cooled some of it. But, yeah, that's definitely a rivalry.
If TCU's favored, they're going to win that game. If Baylor's favored, TCU most likely is going to win that game. From Coleman, let's see. Let me see here.
But I think that one's kind of underrated, although I can understand why it's not really thought of outside of those two schools. And, again, they're two smaller schools as well. So it's not as out in your face like Oklahoma State versus somebody or whatever. But that's the one I think of. I think there's potential for a lot of new ones. But I don't know what another one would be like. Oak State, K-State? Like, I don't know what would be considered. I mean, I mentioned K-State, Kansas, obviously.
Yeah. I mentioned, but like as far as underrated or like one that's under the radar, I think Tech and Oklahoma has kind of gotten to be a fun one. Although, I mean, Oklahoma just has so many more of those games. I mean, I guess it's fun in that.
Maybe it is for Tech. I don't think for Oklahoma.
Although I will say this, and to credit to Tech fans, they are the one who has 12 best friends, right? They're the ones who's like, you know, Garrett's my best friend, and Craig's my best friend, and David's my best friend. Everybody's my best friend. And the opposite, because the way that they flood in and now like go into places. Look, the Farrell Center sold out tomorrow for Baylor and Texas Tech. Now, optimistically, people who wear green and gold think like, "Well, way to go, guys! Good job." But we know what Texas Tech does. We know what Arkansas did last week. Tech does it everywhere, so it's not just you. They go and flood the tickets.
To do with TCU.
Yeah, the whole thing about it. Tickets, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they show up and they go places, so they kind of make themselves everybody else's rival. And part of that might be because of the kind of brush off, which I thought was kind of silly from A&M, in that, A&M would go into Lubbock, the Tech fans were nuts about it, and A&M fans were like, well, you're not Texas. Yeah, but you're still not beating them as often as you should be, A&M. So, yeah, they're a rival now, and you need to at least match their
No one can tell
focus.
you who your rival is.
Yeah.
You can say, Patrick Cheney, if everyone is a rival, then no one is a rival.
Exactly.
The word loses its meaning.
Yeah.
All right, good for you. Appreciate that as well.